What would you do if everything you ever had, everything you thought defined you, was stripped away in a single night? Close your eyes and imagine it. You wake up in a room the size of most people's apartments, with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off polished marble floors. You stretch on a bed so soft it feels like clouds, and when you step outside, a driver is already waiting by the latest luxury car. Breakfast? Prepared by chefs who know your tastes better than you do. Clothes? Imported. Friends? Always ready to party, because being around you means access to wealth, status, and power. Now imagine that by sundown, it's gone. The mansion doors close behind you. Your cards are cut off. The friends you thought you had vanish one by one. And all you have left is a single suitcase and a world that suddenly feels colder, harsher, and uninterested in who you used to be. That's not just a story. It was Daniel Harrington's life. The only son of billionaire magnate Richard Harrington, Daniel had grown up in a world most people could only dream about. From private jets to exclusive galas, from beachfront villas to elite schools, Daniel had it all. Or at least, that's what he thought. But life has a way of teaching lessons the hard way. One decision, one mistake, one cold conversation with his father, and everything changed. What Daniel did next, however, would go on to shock not just his father, not just the people who once turned their backs on him, but millions around the world. This is not a story about losing money. This is a story about losing yourself and finding something far greater. Daniel Harrington was born into a life so extravagant that people whispered about it in awe. His father, Richard Harrington, was a self-made billionaire, a man who had clawed his way from the dirt of poverty to the shining towers of power. His empire stretched across industries: finance, real estate, technology. The name Harrington wasn't just a family name. It was a brand stamped on skyscrapers, yachts, and luxury hotels. Daniel grew up knowing nothing but abundance. His earliest memories weren't of toys bought from corner stores, but of model cars custom-built in Italy. His backyard wasn't a patch of grass. It was a manicured garden stretching for acres, complete with fountains, statues, and imported flowers that bloomed year-round. By the time he was 16, he had traveled to more countries than most people could name. By 21, he drove cars that cost more than most people's homes. And yet, for all the glittering surface of his life, something inside him remained untested, unshaped. Daniel had charm, yes. He had looks, education, and confidence. But what he didn't have, what his father knew he desperately needed, was grit. Richard Harrington had spent his youth working in sweatshops, eating stale bread for dinner, and fighting tooth and nail for every opportunity. To him, suffering was the forge that built strength. To him, Daniel's easy life was a weakness. And when Daniel came to him one day with a bold idea, Richard saw it as both an opportunity and a test. "Father," Daniel said one evening, stepping into Richard's private office, a place lined with leather-bound books, maps, and portraits of men who had built empires. "There's a company I've been watching, a startup. They're building something revolutionary. It could change everything in the digital world. I want to invest in them, heavily." Richard studied his son, his piercing gray eyes weighing every word. "And why do you believe in them?" Daniel straightened his shoulders. He wanted to sound confident, visionary, like the business leaders he had read about. "They're young, ambitious, full of ideas. They remind me of you." A flicker of something, pride, maybe, crossed Richard's face. Against his better judgment, he agreed. "Fine, I'll fund this venture. But remember, Daniel, business is not a game. When you take risks, lives and fortunes are at stake. If this fails, the lesson will be yours to carry." For a few months, Daniel was ecstatic. He felt like a king in his own right, not just the billionaire's son. He attended board meetings, shook hands with bright young entrepreneurs, and envisioned himself as the future of the Harrington dynasty. But then the reports came in. The company was burning cash faster than it could raise it. Promises were broken. The revolutionary idea turned out to be more hype than reality. And just like that, millions, his father's millions, were gone. The night Richard called him back into the office, Daniel already knew what was coming. Still, He hoped for mercy. His father didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Sit," Richard said simply. His voice was calm, almost too calm. The kind of calm that chilled Daniel's blood. "You gambled," Richard began, "and you lost. But money isn't the real issue here. The issue is you." Daniel's mouth went dry. I'll pay you back. I'll fix it." Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze sharp as a blade. "You can't fix this because you don't even know what you broke. You've lived your whole life thinking money is air. You breathe it in without effort. But money is not air, Daniel. It's fire. And fire, when uncontrolled, destroys everything." Daniel swallowed hard. "Please, Father, give me another chance." But Richard shook his head. "No, the Harrington name has carried you long enough. It's time you learn what life means without it. From tonight, you're on your own." The words hit Daniel like a thunderclap. He thought he misheard. "On my own? What do you mean?" "I mean," Richard said, standing now, his towering frame casting a shadow across the room. "No money. No credit cards. No cars. No safety net. You'll leave this house with nothing but what you can carry. You will work, you will struggle, and you will either break or you will grow. But you will not do it under my roof." Daniel's heart pounded. "You can't do this. I'm your son." Richard's eyes softened for a brief second, then hardened again. "Exactly. And that's why I must." An hour later, Daniel found himself standing outside the iron gates of the Harrington estate. The mansion behind him glowed like a jewel in the night, but its doors were closed. In his hand, he held a single suitcase. In his chest, his heart felt heavier than the world. The billionaire's son had become a man with nothing. The first night away from the Harrington estate, Daniel convinced himself it was temporary. Surely his father was only teaching him a lesson. Surely the gates would open again, the cars would come back, and life would return to normal. But as the hours stretched into days, and the days into weeks, Daniel realized the truth. This was no game. At first, he had a little money, cash he'd hidden in his wallet. He checked into a modest motel, a place with peeling wallpaper and flickering lights, so different from the polished marble halls he'd grown up in. He told himself it was fine, that this was just a short stay before things went back to normal. But the money slipped away quickly. Meals, bus fares, the nightly cost of a bed. Within a week, his wallet was almost empty. He looked down at the few crumpled bills left and felt the first sting of panic. That was when he turned to his friends. Daniel scrolled through his contacts, dialing numbers that once always answered on the first ring. These were the people who had laughed with him at rooftop parties, who had borrowed his cars, who had posted endless photos with him on social media. "Hey man," he said when one finally picked up. He tried to sound casual, light. "Listen, things are a little rough right now. Do you think I could crash at your place for a while?" A pause, then a laugh, uncomfortable and sharp. "Daniel, are you serious? I mean, I'd love to help, but my place is kind of packed. You understand." Click. The line went dead. Another friend texted back hours later. "Sorry bro, super busy right now. Hope you're okay though." Others didn't reply at all. Daniel stared at his phone, the screen glowing cold in his hand. For the first time, he realized, without the Harrington name, he was just another young man with empty pockets. The friends he thought were loyal had never been friends at all. They had been passengers on the luxury train, and once the train stopped, they stepped off without looking back. By the second week, Daniel was out of money. The motel manager, a stout man with tired eyes, knocked on his door one morning. "Time's up," the man said flatly. "You need to check out." Daniel tried to argue, but his words felt hollow. Within an hour, he was standing on the curb, suitcase at his feet, watching the motel sign flicker above him. For the first time in his life, he had no roof over his head. The city that once seemed like his playground now looked like a labyrinth of strangers. He wandered for hours, dragging the suitcase behind him, his stomach gnawing with hunger. When night fell, he found himself sitting on a bench in a public park. Around him, the city hummed with life. People laughing as they passed, couples walking hand in hand, taxis honking in the distance. And yet Daniel felt like a ghost, invisible and unwanted. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, shivering as the autumn wind cut through the trees. He had never known cold like this before. At home, The temperature was always perfect, the fireplaces always burning. But here, under the open sky, the chill sank into his bones. That night, he barely slept. Every sound made him jump. The rustle of leaves, the footsteps of strangers, the distant sirens. He had always felt safe behind the walls of the Harrington estate. Now, the world felt dangerous, exposed. By morning, his hunger was unbearable. He had skipped dinner the night before, and now his stomach growled so loudly he was sure people walking by could hear it. He passed a bakery, the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air, and for a moment he thought he might faint. He dug through his suitcase, hoping he'd forgotten some money, but found only clothes and the last remnants of his pride. Desperation pushed him into places he never thought he'd go. He lingered near dumpsters behind restaurants, hoping to find leftovers. He stood in line at a soup kitchen, staring at the floor, praying no one would recognize him. The boy who had once eaten caviar on yachts now ate soup from a chipped bowl among the city's forgotten souls. Every night, he told himself it couldn't get worse. Every morning, he woke to find it did. The weight of humiliation pressed down on him like a stone. People who walked past didn't see Daniel Harrington, son of a billionaire. They saw a young man in rumpled clothes, hair unkempt, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. But even in the depths of his struggle, a small ember of pride refused to die. He told himself he wouldn't beg. Not yet. He would find a way. Somehow. What Daniel didn't realize was that the very streets that broke him were also about to remake him. The third week on the streets was the hardest. Daniel's body had grown weaker from lack of proper food, his once stylish clothes now sagging and stained. The sharp edges of his cheekbones showed through where fullness once hid them. Every night, he slept with one eye open, his suitcase clutched like a shield, afraid someone might take the only possessions he had left. He had been humbled, broken, dragged lower than he thought possible. And yet, the universe wasn't done with him. It happened on a night colder than most. The wind cut like knives, and Daniel huddled near a building for shelter, his arms wrapped tightly around his chest. His jacket, once a luxury designer piece, was now his armor against the biting cold. That was when he noticed him. An old man sat slumped against the wall a few yards away. His hair was white, his beard unkempt, and his body trembled under the thin sheet of fabric draped across his shoulders. His lips were cracked, his hands curled tight against his chest in a desperate attempt to hold in warmth. For a long time, Daniel just watched. He felt a pang in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long while. If I'm as cold with a jacket, Daniel thought, how much colder must he be without one? He hesitated. That jacket was the last piece of dignity he had, the one thing that reminded him of who he used to be. Without it, he'd look just like the man before him, another forgotten figure blending into the city's shadows. His mind battled his heart. Logic screamed, you need this jacket. Survive first. No one will help you if you collapse from the cold. But his heart whispered, maybe surviving means more than just keeping yourself warm. Slowly, Daniel stood. His fingers fumbled with the zipper, his breath misting in the frigid air. He walked toward the old man and knelt beside him. Here, Daniel murmured, his voice soft but firm. The old man blinked, his eyes watery and tired. Daniel gently draped the jacket over his frail shoulders, adjusting it to cover as much of his body as possible. The man's lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from the shock of kindness. God bless you, son, he whispered, his voice rough like gravel. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. He walked back to his spot against the wall, hugging himself now with only a thin shirt. Within minutes, the cold sank in deeper, making his teeth chatter. Yet inside, something remarkable happened. He felt a warmth he hadn't known in weeks. It wasn't the kind of warmth that came from a jacket. It was the warmth of giving. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Not because of the cold, but because of the thought burning in his mind. For the first time, I gave something, not because I had extra, not because it was easy, but because someone else needed it more than I did. The realization was like a spark striking dry wood. A thought that began to grow, flickering, refusing to go out. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of frying pans, the sharp smell of coffee grounds. This was Daniel's new world. Days blurred into each other as he worked tirelessly in the back of the diner. At first, it was humiliation that fueled him. Every scrape of a dirty plate, every bar from the head cook reminded him that he was a fallen prince in a world that didn't care about his old crown. But slowly, something began to change. One afternoon, after hours of scouring grease-stained pans, Daniel slipped out back for a break. The alley smelled of oil and damp pavement, but it was quiet. He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes, letting the cool air wash over him. That's when he heard it, the faint sound of laughter. Turning, he saw two little kids sitting cross-legged near the dumpster. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Their clothes were patched, their shoes too small, but their faces lit up as they shared a crumpled comic book. Daniel's heart twisted. He recognized the look he'd seen in the mirror once, long ago, when life was simple and money didn't define everything. He crouched down. "Hey," he said softly. The kids froze, wary. One clutched the comic to his chest. "It's okay," Daniel assured them, raising his hands. "I'm not here to take it." The younger one spoke first. "You work in there, right?" "My brother and I. We come sometimes to smell the food." Daniel swallowed. He knew hunger too well now. "Wait here." He slipped inside, grabbed 2 leftover rolls from a tray, and returned to the alley. The kids' eyes widened as he handed them over. They tore into the bread with the kind of joy only hunger can magnify. For a moment, Daniel just watched, a strange ache in his chest. Then he smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in weeks. "You know," he said, "someday you'll sit in that diner as paying customers. You'll order the biggest meals they've got." The older boy laughed through a mouthful of bread. "You're right. We don't have that kind of money." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Neither did I. Not anymore. But you will. Both of you. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." They looked at him curiously, as though trying to decide if he was crazy or serious. But something about the conviction in his voice made them nod. That night, Daniel lay awake on his park bench, staring at the stars peeking through the city's haze. His mind replayed the moment in the alley. The children's laughter, their gratitude, their spark of hope. It had lit something inside him. "I can't just survive anymore," he thought. "I need to build something, not for me alone, but for people like them, people who don't get a chance." The idea was raw, unformed, but it pulsed in him like a heartbeat. He began saving every dollar he could. No more unnecessary sandwiches, no more small comforts. Every coin, every tip, every extra shift went into a battered envelope he kept hidden in his suitcase. At the diner, he started asking questions. Not about food, but about business. He watched how the manager handled suppliers, how prices shifted, how regulars kept coming back. When deliveries arrived, Daniel offered to help carry boxes, not for the exercise, but so he could chat with the delivery drivers about costs and logistics. When a waitress complained about tips, Daniel listened, absorbing everything about customer service. Bit by bit, he was building a map in his head, a blueprint. And then, one fateful afternoon, opportunity came knocking. A man in a tailored suit walked into the diner. He wasn't a customer. He was a landlord. Daniel overheard him speaking to the manager. "Rent's going up," the man declared flatly. "Pay it, or I'll find someone who will." The manager groaned. "You can't do this. We've been here for 15 years. "That's business," the landlord shrugged. "Nothing personal." The conversation ended with tension hanging heavy in the air. The manager slammed a coffee pot on the counter, muttering about greedy landlords and impossible numbers. Daniel's mind raced. The scene felt eerily familiar. It was his father, in another form. The same ruthlessness, the same hunger for more at any cost. Only this time, Daniel wasn't the one in power. He was on the ground, watching good people suffer from someone else's greed. That night, as he walked home, the spark in him became a flame. "I know what it's like to have everything. I know what it's like to have nothing. And maybe that means I know how to build something different." The envelope of savings burned in his suitcase like a secret treasure. It wasn't much, not yet. But Daniel had a plan forming. A plan that could turn his pain into power, his losses into lessons. And he knew one thing for certain. He would never be the kind of man his father was. The city's mornings were always the same. The hum of buses, the hiss of espresso machines, the shuffle of workers rushing to beat the clock. But for Daniel, each sunrise now felt like a challenge whispered into his bones. He had been saving for months, and though his envelope of cash was still thin, it was heavier than when he first started. Every coin clinked with possibility. Yet the question haunted him. What can I possibly build with so little? The answer came one afternoon when he was scrubbing dishes. The cook, a gruff man with arms like tree trunks, grumbled about the delivery truck being late. If these suppliers can't get me fresh ingredients on time, I swear I'll... He broke off, muttering curses under his breath. Daniel paused, a sponge dripping soapy water in his hand. Suppliers, delays, customers unhappy. He saw a chain of frustration stretching from the truck to the kitchen to the diners waiting at their tables. What if I could fix just one link in that chain? That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Instead, he scribbled on scraps of paper in the diner's break room, sketching out an idea. Street carts with low overhead, affordable meals made quickly, positioned near bus stops and subway stations. Not a restaurant, not yet, but food that comforted people, food that traveled fast, food that was dependable. By dawn, he had a plan. It started humbly. Daniel spent nearly all his savings on a second-hand cart he found through a classified ad. It was battered, dented, and smelled faintly of rust, but it had wheels. He polished it, painted it, scrubbed it until it gleamed under the morning light. He bought flour, eggs, a small hot plate, and a stack of paper plates. The first day, he wheeled his cart to the corner near the subway entrance. His hands trembled. His sign read in shaky black marker, "Hot breakfast, $1." The smell of sizzling pancakes and fried eggs drifted into the morning crowd. At first, people hurried past. No one wanted to take a chance on the young man with the cart, dressed in borrowed clothes and a smile that wavered like a candle flame. But then, a construction worker stopped. "One plate," he said, dropping $1. Daniel's hands moved fast, serving up eggs and bread with trembling efficiency. The worker took a bite, paused, and nodded. Good. It was the single word Daniel needed. By the time noon arrived, his stack of plates was empty. Day after day, he returned. Rain or shine, he stood at his corner, flipping, frying, smiling, learning. Some mornings he sold little. Other days he sold out. Slowly, the same faces began to return. They greeted him by name. "You're faster than the coffee shop." One woman laughed, sipping her tea. "Better eggs than my wife makes," a man joked, earning a playful glare from his partner. "Thanks for being here every morning," a nurse said, tucking her breakfast in her bag before rushing off to her shift. It wasn't just food Daniel was giving them. It was consistency, warmth, a reliable smile on the corner of a chaotic street. One evening, as Daniel counted his modest earnings, a voice startled him. "You remind me of someone I used to know." He looked up. An older man stood nearby, dressed simply but with sharp eyes that hinted at experience. "Who's that?" Daniel asked. "Myself," the man chuckled. "I started with a cart too. Coffee and bagels. Now I own 3 cafes." Daniel blinked, his hands frozen over his stack of bills. The man studied him for a moment. "You've got the look. Hungry, but not for food. Hungry to build." Daniel's chest tightened. He didn't know if this stranger was a blessing or a test. "I don't want to just make money," Daniel said finally. His voice was steady, his eyes lit with conviction. "I want to prove that even when you lose everything, you can rebuild. And not just for yourself, for others too." The man smiled faintly. "Then you're on the right path. Keep going. But remember, growth requires more than hard work. It requires vision. Don't just sell eggs. Sell hope." And just like that, he walked away, leaving Daniel staring after him, his words burning in his mind. That night, Daniel didn't feel tired. For the first time since he'd lost everything, he felt alive. The cart was only a seed, but he knew now with absolute certainty that it could grow into something far greater, something that could one day inspire millions. And so, the billionaire's son, once broken and forgotten, pushed his dented little cart through the streets with fire in his heart. The empire he was about to build would not be born of gold or inheritance. It would be forged in sweat, grit, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest beginnings can light the way to greatness. The city had a way of ignoring small dreams. It swallowed ambition under neon lights and drowned whispers of hope in the roar of subway trains. Yet Daniel's cart refused to be ignored. Each morning, the line at his corner grew longer. Office workers, nurses, construction crews, people from every walk of life came for his dollar breakfasts. They came for the food, yes, but more than that, they came for him. "Morning, Daniel," a regular shouted one brisk Tuesday. "Got my order ready?" Another teased. "You're the only reason I get to work on time." A nurse laughed, grabbing her sandwich. Daniel beamed at every word. Each customer felt like family now, a circle of strangers who had begun to believe in him. But as the demand grew, so did the weight on his shoulders. One Friday evening, as Daniel was cleaning his cart, two college students approached him. "You ever thought of expanding?" one asked. "Yeah," the other chimed in. "My dorm could use this." You make a fortune outside the campus gates. The idea planted itself in Daniel's mind like a spark hitting dry grass. Expansion. He had thought about it, scribbled about it in his notebook, but hearing it from customers made it feel real. That weekend, he pored over his notes, running numbers late into the night. With his growing savings, he could afford a second cart. It wouldn't be easy, more supplies, more hours, but it was possible. And Daniel had learned something about possibility. It always started as a whisper before becoming a roar. By the following month, there were two carts. One he manned himself. The other he entrusted to a young man named Luis, a dishwasher from the diner who had become his friend. "Treat every plate like you're serving your own family," Daniel told him. Luis nodded, eyes shining with pride. "Got it, boss." The results were immediate. Students lined up after lectures. Workers stopped by during breaks. The small empire of street carts had begun, fueled by word of mouth and Daniel's relentless drive. But success is a double-edged sword. It wasn't long before someone noticed. One evening, as Daniel was closing up, two men in suits appeared. They didn't look like customers. Their polished shoes and sharp smiles told a different story. "You're doing well here," one said casually. "Too well." Daniel stiffened. "What do you mean?" The man leaned closer. "This corner? This block? It belongs to someone. You're cutting into profits." "I'm just selling breakfast," Daniel replied, his voice tight. "Exactly," the man smirked. "And that's a problem. Unless you're willing to pay a fee." Daniel's stomach churned. Extortion. Protection money. The same kind of greed he thought he'd left behind in his father's mansion was staring him in the face again, only dirtier, hungrier, meaner. He clenched his fists. "I'm not paying you." The men exchanged a look. "Think about it. We'll be ashamed if something happened to that pretty little cart of yours." And just like that, they walked away, their laughter echoing in the night. The next morning, Daniel found one of his carts overturned. Supplies scattered, pans bent, the sign shattered into splinters. Luis stood beside it, his face pale. "They came, Daniel," he whispered. "They warned me. I tried to stop them." His voice broke. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't your fault." Anger surged through him, hot and raw. He thought he had escaped the cruelty of the rich, the callousness of power, only to face it in another form. For a moment, he considered walking away. Maybe the cart business was too small to fight such forces. Maybe he should accept that survival was the best he could do. But then he remembered the kids behind the diner. The nurse who grabbed her sandwich on the way to work. The construction worker who joked every morning. They depended on him, not just for food, but for proof. Proof that someone who had lost everything could rise again. And he would not let bullies, in suits or otherwise, take that away. That night, Daniel made a decision. He would not pay. He would not quit. He would rebuild stronger. And this time, he would draw a line in the sand. His father had built an empire on fear and control. Daniel would build one on courage and trust. And if the city wanted to fight, he was ready. The billionaire's son, once broken and forgotten, was no longer just surviving. He was rising. And nothing, no greed, no extortion, no threat was going to stop him. The night after the attack on his cart, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat by the flickering street lamp near his bench, staring at the broken pieces he had managed to salvage. bent pans, a cracked griddle. The hand-painted sign that once proudly read hot breakfast, /$1, now split down the middle like a broken promise. Luis sat beside him, silent, guilt written all over his face. You should have walked away, Luis muttered. This isn't worth it. Not against them. Daniel shook his head slowly. You know why I started this cart, Luis? Luis looked up. It wasn't about money. Not first. It was about proving to myself that I wasn't finished. That I could create something meaningful, no matter how small. And then, when people started coming, when they smiled, when they said I made their mornings better, that's when I realized this isn't just mine anymore. It's theirs too. Luis sighed. But if they come back, they will, Daniel cut in. His eyes burned with determination. And that's exactly why we can't back down. The next morning, instead of disappearing, Daniel wheeled what remained of the cart back to his corner. He had patched it together with duct tape and grit. It was ugly, dented, a shadow of its former self, but it stood. As the crowd gathered, murmurs spread. Some gasped at the damage. Others shook their heads. What happened? A nurse asked. Trouble, Daniel admitted. But I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, people stepped forward. How much do you need to fix it? Asked the construction worker, pulling out his wallet. Count me in, said the nurse. I'll help too, another customer added. Before long, Daniel was surrounded by a crowd, not of pity, but of solidarity. People pressed bills into his hands, offered connections, whispered words of encouragement. You're not alone, someone said. We believe in you, another added. Daniel's throat tightened. For so long, he had seen himself as a fallen prince stripped of everything. But here, on the street corner, among ordinary people who believed in him, he felt richer than he ever had in his father's mansion. Within days, Daniel had a new cart, bigger, brighter, sturdier. Painted across the front in bold red letters were 3 words that captured everything he had endured. Rising from nothing. It wasn't just a cart anymore. It was a message, and the city listened. Local bloggers wrote about the young man who stood up to extortion. Social media posts spread photos of his rebuilt cart, tagged with captions like Inspiration on Wheels and Breakfast with Purpose. Soon, news outlets picked up the story. Reporters came with cameras, asking questions. Daniel spoke honestly, his words unpolished but heartfelt. I lost everything once, he told them. But I realized that as long as you're alive, you're never truly finished. You can always start again, even if it's just with a cart, a plate, and a smile. The story went viral. Strangers from other states began messaging him, asking how they could help. Donations poured in, not just money, but supplies, equipment, even offers to franchise his idea. For the first time, Daniel saw the horizon stretching wider than his little corner. His cart wasn't just surviving, it was sparking something bigger. But as the cheers grew louder, Daniel knew the shadows hadn't vanished. The men in suits hadn't returned yet, but he felt their eyes watching. Success had always attracted envy. Power always attracted predators. And deep down, he knew this battle wasn't just about street carts. It was about something much deeper. His father's world. The ruthless empire of billionaires who crushed others to climb higher wasn't so different from the men who had tried to break his cart. The question that haunted him now was this. If I rise too high, will I become the very thing I despise? Daniel stood at the edge of greatness, with a movement behind him and enemies ahead. And somewhere, in the marble halls of privilege, he could almost hear his father's voice echoing like a ghost. You'll never last, Daniel. You're too soft. Daniel clenched his fists. Soft? No, he wasn't soft. He was forged by loss, by hunger, by grit. And soon, he would prove to the city, to his father, and to himself that a man who had nothing could build something greater than wealth. He could build hope. The diner television buzzed with static before the anchor's polished voice cut through. Local entrepreneur Daniel Carter has captured national attention with his inspirational food cart movement, rising from nothing. What began as a single street cart is now expanding across the city, with hundreds rallying behind his mission. Daniel's message of hope is resonating everywhere. The room erupted in applause. Customers patted Daniel's back. The cook gave him a rare smile, and Luis lifted a cup in triumph. But across the city, in a glass tower that pierced the clouds, another man watched the same broadcast with narrowed eyes. Victor Carter, billionaire, father. His jaw tightened as the camera showed his son serving food, laughing with customers, speaking with a humility Victor had never taught him. To Victor, wealth was about dominance, control, and legacy. And now, his only heir was building a name not of power, but of people. This folly, Victor muttered, crushing his cigar in the ashtray. My son thinks he can replace power with pity. He dialed a number. Bring him to me. When Daniel arrived at the towering office building days later, escorted by two of his father's men, he felt a familiar chill crawl over him. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers glistened, but all he saw were memories of cold lessons and harsher words. His father stood at the window, staring out over the city like a king surveying his kingdom. You've made quite the name for yourself, Victor said without turning. Daniel remained silent. Finally, Victor faced him. His sharp blue eyes, so like Daniel's own, held a mix of disappointment and disdain. You could have inherited everything, Victor said. The company, the wealth, the empire. Instead, you chose to flip eggs on the street. Do you have any idea how foolish that looks? Daniel met his gaze steadily. I don't care how it looks. I care what it means. Victor's lip curled. Meaning doesn't pay. Meaning doesn't protect. Power does. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm. And what did your power ever give you, father? Fear. Enemies. A son who couldn't respect you. Victor's face darkened. Respect is irrelevant. Survival is all that matters. No, Daniel countered. Survival is only the beginning. What matters is what you do with it. I lost everything, but I found purpose. You gained everything, and you lost yourself. For a long moment, father and son stared at each other. The titan of cold steel wealth against the young man forged in fire and humility. Victor broke the silence, his voice low. You'll burn out. The world will chew you up, like it did everyone else who thought kindness could win. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe, but if I fall, I'll fall knowing I lifted others first. Can you say the same? Victor had no answer. Daniel walked out of that tower with his head high. He hadn't come for approval, nor forgiveness. He had come to prove, to himself most of all, that he was no longer the boy crushed under his father's shadow. He was his own man now, and his empire would be built not on fear, but on hope. Months passed, and rising from nothing spread across the city. Dozens of carts rolled out, each run by people who once had nothing. Ex-dishwashers, students, the unemployed, the forgotten. Daniel gave them a chance, just as he had once needed one. The movement became more than food. It became a symbol, a reminder that no matter how far someone falls, they can rise again, not alone, but together. Crowds cheered his name not because he was a billionaire's son, but because he was their son, the city's son, proof that resilience could bloom even in concrete cracks. And though whispers of his father's empire still lingered in the background, Daniel no longer feared them. He had carved his own path. From nothing, he had found everything. Not riches, not mansions, but purpose. And that, he knew, was worth more than gold.